Thank you. I have some coworkers in the back, so if they get rowdy, just like knock them over in their chairs. That's my Twitter handle. If you want to tweet at me, DM me, whatever, during the presentation, that's fine. My phone is stowed away in my backpack, so it won't vibrate off the desk or whatever. But first, about me. I love investigating how systems work internally as well as externally. So I'm also a fan of bobcats for building things, destroying things. I remember a summer job I had way back in high school, actually. I would just ask at the end of the day, I was like 14 or so, if the general contractor would let me take out all the trash and dump it into the dumpster in the back of the work site. That was the best thing ever. So anyway, this relates to my talk, you might be wondering, because I, as a DevTools team lead at ReadyTalk, work on paving a smoother road to production. So have an interest in construction, have an interest in bobcats, obviously want to figure out the best way to deliver our systems internally and externally to our customers. So if you saw my abstract, you might have wondered why I picked this puppet regime idea. And I want to define what a puppet regime is, because at the time I created that title, I actually didn't know exactly what it meant, but I was like, that's cool. And then I will explain how that's different and how I see that different from a benevolent puppet regime and how that changes the definition a little bit. So a puppet regime would be this, a system that imposes hardships on those governed. So a benevolent puppet regime, the twist is a system that is designed to improve operations on those governed. And so that includes computers and people, right? We don't just care about computers and running Puppet on computers, but those systems do affect actual people as well. So we need to concern ourselves with both things. So I work for a company called ReadyTalk that does web, audio, and video conferencing software. And when I joined about 4 years ago, we had 40 engineers, or about that many. I did try some of these dance moves, by the way. And now we're about at 80 engineers. So doubled our engineering team in 4 years. And went from hundreds of machines to thousands of machines, desktop machines to servers that are in production running our software. And we, at the time, about 3 years ago, we had a sysadmin who, he was in charge of setting up everyone's machines when they come in, whenever we'd hire a new employee. So 40 employees we had join about. And he would have to bring in the desktop, configure that thing, and he actually used what I'll call the old Perly Perl script to configure all those 40 machines. So a little bit overloaded. We have a little bit of danger on top here, stacking on some more packages onto that script. And then we have a lot of waiting around, right? We're waiting to get this shipped off to the right person, the new developer that just joined. So that made him real sad. And he was on Reddit one day reading some articles and found an article about Puppet. And it made him do this. So he was really excited to see a way to take all his Perl script logic that was really near and dear to his heart and take it in a way that would make it more scalable as the company grew. So as he started implementing Puppet modules and that sort of thing, and delivering it to developer QA workstations, he started hearing things like, from developers, like this. Well, I'm not going to allow Puppet on my machine because it's going to destroy all my .dot files. It doesn't make any sense if you know how Puppet works, but it goes to show that in an environment where people don't know exactly what an automation tool is, there's some fear there. And then we have people say, well, we have something that's working just fine, and I got my machine within a month, and so that's good enough, right? So 2 years ago, my team, who kind of sits in between the sysadmin operations team and the developers and the QA folk for our ReadyTalk software, produced a survey. And one of the questions on the survey was this. So which statement best describes your ability to work on Puppet modules? And we had something this would be the worst answer. I try to avoid working on Puppet modules, and then this would be the best one that we came up with. So they had about 5 choices. And the distribution was this. So we had most people, most developers, most QA in this vote. The saddest part about this is there were people in the groups that were supposed to be maintaining our Puppet modules in that section. Okay. And then this one is not a hard bar to reach either. Like if you can read something, and the Puppet DSL is pretty reasonable to understand the reason about. So we had essentially 3/4 of the people didn't know what Puppet was doing, didn't know what it could be used for. And so that might have been leading to some of people's frustrations with the tool. So some survey quotes after this question where I don't use Puppet. And then this one, which leans toward one thing that I'll get into later, but people didn't realize that they had access to contribute to Puppet modules. They felt like the Puppet modules were guarded, mainly because it was something that they were afraid of, right? And so most developers looked like this. They could see it, but they didn't want to touch it. And then really they didn't want to see it at all. So the other question we asked was, what do you do when you run into issues with Puppet? Here's the worst answer that we didn't want to see. And here's the best one, albeit I think we would like to see this much better than it is now. But distribution is, the worst one is a valid Jira issue with steps to reproduce the problem was kind of the lowest end we saw. And then this, I asked a subject matter for assistance was the other section. Those were like one of the two or three worst answers that they could have provided, because those two answers provide a lot of people coming over to our area every 15 minutes. Like as Deepak said, we would have someone over in our cube area asking for help, and they would say, "Oh, my machine isn't working the way I expect. Puppet must be doing something." It was a high maintenance overhead for a tool that was supposed to be helping us, right? So some survey quotes, these are the best. I've never had to do anything with Puppet. When I asked for help, people ran away from me. So not only did the developers not want to touch Puppet, even we as people who were supporting the tool didn't really know what we were doing, didn't have a good foundation of our Puppet infrastructure. And so we didn't want to get involved either. And then we have this one, which is by far. So here's a more poignant quote that will take us into how we went from this ridiculous environment of people being very unhappy with a tool that should have made their lives awesome. But what I want to highlight here is people have no idea how to contribute or improve internal Puppet infrastructure. So people were actually playing around with Puppet on VMs at home and trying it out and getting interested in the technology, but they had no way of making Puppet usage at ReadyTalk better for all of us. So 2 years ago, we ran this survey. I would ask that you, first of all, check out the Puppet Labs State of DevOps survey that was just released this past week, and get an idea for what Puppet Labs is looking for in like your DevOps world or your IT administration world as a starting place. But also consider doing it internally in your company, because you can suss out a lot of these things that might be happening in hallway conversations, water cooler conversations, and you can do a lot internally in your company to improve the products that you're delivering, how fast you're delivering those products, just by talking to people, getting people's feedback. So with all that said, I want to mention that this was my phrase for the last 3 years that I kept telling people, it's not Puppet's fault, it's how we're using Puppet or how we've built our module that's the problem. So that's a solvable problem, right? If it's Puppet's fault, if it's this tool's fault, then you feel like you can't fix anything. But if it's actually our fault, then you're more inclined to fix the problem, right? So I have a survey for everyone in the room with this topic of everyone should be taking surveys, giving surveys. I want to see how long it takes to set up a new machine for any engineer that comes on, all the way from getting the machine out of the box, installing everything that they need. And what we're going to do is there's 4 questions. So keep in mind how many points you have, and then I'll have people raise their hands at the end, and we'll figure out kind of the distribution of who's in the room and where we can go from there. So the second question is, how long does it take to fulfill a normal priority request from someone to install a service on every one of your machines, including production? So everyone got that one? Or at least a decent idea. Now the next one is, the only difference is this emergency request. Now the difference between those two questions is awesome if you have data from internally in your company, is because you will find that if you can have an emergency request fulfilled in like an hour, but it takes a normal priority request, like a week or a month, then you're causing more pain for yourself down the road in the normal priority work, right? So the last one is, who contributes to the advancement of your infrastructure via Puppet? Obviously the best one, I'm a little biased, but everyone should be the right answer. But honestly, ReadyTalk is not there yet, so don't feel too bad. Everyone got their answers, their total point scores. So my scale and distribution is, if you're up here, you're killing it, and you should be up here. So we can trade now if you want. Who's up here? No one? Okay. I made that a pretty hard bar to reach. 20 to 34. It's not your first puppet show. Nice. That's awesome to see. 5 to 19. This is actually where ReadyTalk is, so don't feel too bad. And then 0 to 4. No one. Oh no, there's a few. All right, so once again, consider, even once my slides get posted, take this survey question for question and ask it of your coworkers in a formal manner or informal manner, and see what you get. So the first aspect of the survey that I want to address is this idea of people could help but couldn't, being a wall to actually fixing the problems that people were really frustrated by. So there was a low involvement. And the next one is, people who know how to maintain an advanced Puppet are too tied up in fixing problems. So this was, people would come over to our area and ask for help, but we were too tied up with all the support requests to do anything about it, right? Does this start to sound familiar to all your positions? So our teams were tied up in support requests, couldn't make much progress just because of the sheer amount that we were getting. So we had a screen group. Then we had Puppet as being perceived as something that was getting in the way or inconvenient. So at this point, if you're all from Denver, you should recognize this park. This is kind of by the Platte River. And this trail is like almost a sidewalk by now. People don't want to walk all the way around. They're like, oh, I want to get over here, so I'm going to just walk through there. And there's a sign here that says, please use sidewalk, please protect our park. And I think they just took that off because they're like, it's not worth it. So processes and teams were being subverted, which was making all this stuff even worse, right? So we had low involvement, we had a strained group, and we had subverted processes, which was just creating a positive feedback loop. Now, that was making us run like this and not go anywhere. And this is W. Edwards Deming. He's a great thinker about how systems work, how you should be designing quality into systems. And he has this awesome quote that's multifaceted. So it's, hard work will not ensure quality. Best efforts will not ensure quality. Gadgets, computers, or investment in machinery will not ensure quality. So just the fact that you have an automation tool, you have Puppet, doesn't mean you're going to immediately have better quality. It is not enough just to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best. So hopefully, with all these things that I've been talking about, and my own experiences, you can take some of the, you must know what to do best, at least how I think what the best is for ReadyTalk, and what we have done, and implement them into your own Puppet regime back in your own company. So we don't want to have a Puppet regime that imposes hardships. We want to have a Puppet regime that improves operations for everybody, people and computers. So how do we take our Puppet regime game to the next level? I have 3 simple tools, 3 easy tricks that you can use that I'll outline. And they actually go from easy, and I would hope that everyone has the easy part of things, all the way to intermediate to advanced. So as we go across all these topics, you can find things that maybe you can tweak internally or you can aim for, but they have been really awesome to be a part of, and it has made working on Puppet fantastic at ReadyTalk. So the first aspect I want to talk about is let's commit to collaboration. So there's two words in here. We have commitment and collaboration. So the first question in the survey, or one of the questions in the survey, was who contributes to the advancement of your infrastructure via Puppet? And we want to get rid of the low involvement. So we want to get rid of the bad answer group in there. So we want to improve involvement. And so to improve collaboration, we kind of have to approach that with like a human-centric mindset, right? So in keeping with the Puppet regime concept or topic, we want to have an open door policy. So we want to let everyone or anyone contribute. If they say, I wish Puppet was managing this service better or whatever, it's totally up to them to improve that, right? We don't want to say, okay, I might get to that next year. We want to have all the trades involved. So construction, also one of my soft spots. There are a lot of trades involved in managing software. And once you start going into running your Puppet infrastructure, you have to realize that you're taking on a software project in some form. So it would behoove you to bring in some people that have been testing other products internally or other tools or implementing other tools and get their feedback as to how they would want to run or how they would want to improve your Puppet system as it stands. So you also want to leave an open door to the community and also deliver stuff back to the community. One of the problems that ReadyTalk had was thinking that how we did things was special and no one else could contribute. No one else kind of had the same layout of systems that we did, so we had to build everything from the ground up. And so having our systems be able to grab things from the Puppet Forge earlier in the process would have made it easier to say, okay, well that module is almost there and may need a little tweak to it here and there, as Deepak was mentioning. Like, grab that module and contribute back to the community, because that makes it better for all of us trying to get involved. Then the other word that I want to address in this trick is commit. So if you're not putting your Puppet code into a repository right now, do it right now. We started off with a folder on a person's machine that would be SCP to Puppet Masters. So the only place you could really contribute to the canonical source for Puppet was on one person's machine. So you had to go through that person to contribute anything. And so that's really where this idea comes from, which is having a shared language and having access to adding to, subtracting from the shared language that you're using as a company. So focusing on a commitment to collaboration, we get rid of that low involvement and bring more people in and end up having a better product. Now, it may seem simple, right? I said we're starting simple, but that helps us get to the next step, which is automating authority. Now, this relates to, I'm gonna move over here. How long does it take to fulfill a service request to install a service on all your machines, including production? So this is trying to get rid of a strange group. Now, this is a video that I just had to show, since it's the afternoon and everyone's just falling asleep. Hopefully this works. Anyway, I can do the dance moves, actually. So it's a traffic cop in New York City who's like directing traffic while dancing. And she's ridiculous, just has like frantic amount of movement, but like traffic's just going around her. There's like a taxi that goes right past her over here, and then there's lots of honking in the video. Sorry that didn't work. But what I would say is, if you've ever been in an intersection that has a stoplight that's broken, and there's someone trying to manually direct traffic, or maybe a traffic cop out there trying to do his best to free up some congestion, it's never as effective as a stoplight is, right? A stoplight can manage more of the algorithms that have been designed by people that have planned the whole area, and the traffic cop is just trying to keep up. So we want to transform the way we manage our Puppet infrastructure and project from a frantic dancing traffic cop a traffic light. And so when you run a project, specifically when you run your Puppet infrastructure, when you manage your Puppet code, your repository, take this approach, trust but verify. And so we'll get into what that means for us at ReadyTalk. We have, on every Git commit in master or our trunk, we send that commit to be run in Jenkins. How many people are using Jenkins here? Okay, so half. If you're not using any sort of CI system, you should look at any of them and use them to take your Puppet code and at least run some Puppet lint tests, do some basic verification of what you have there. And we've taken that a little step further and started using a tool called Kitchen CI. There's something in the sponsored by Puppet Labs called Beaker that does something similar, and I'll give you the URL to that if you want to check that out later. But that didn't exist when we started using Kitchen CI. So Kitchen is essentially a front on top of Vagrant. So Vagrant can spin up a box for you either on your machine, on some shared infrastructure, or it can spin up EC2 images if you want to do that. Once that box exists, we run a module, like Puppet apply some set of modules to that machine, and then we use server spec, which is a way of testing a remote system to see if it looks the way we expect it to. Now this may seem a little overkill for people that are like, well, the DSL kind of proves that you're doing the right thing. Like it just reads right, so if there's a problem, it's probably Puppet's problem. But what we found is that when you have thousands of lines of Puppet code and packages that may conflict with each other, you end up in weird situations where sometimes you'll apply the Puppet module and then you apply it again and you end up in a different state, like a flip-flopping state. But this infrastructure and this ability for even the CI server to run some tests and boot up images and apply Puppet modules to those boxes made it easier for people that didn't even have access to machines. Let's say someone wanted to improve how we run our LDAP servers. Now, if we were to say, okay, well, you have to contribute to those yourself, they would have to create an LDAP cluster or a machine and try to do anything with that, versus this is in an isolated environment, so they can just mess around with things, say Kitchen test, it'll bring up the box, test everything, test their modifications, and it makes it a lot safer for people to contribute. So it's building on that idea of improving the ability to collaborate. Now this is Beaker. This is Puppet Labs version of Kitchen CI. If you want to check it out. But this is Kitchen CI's configuration file. So we have Puppet Apply being the provisioner, which I outlined before, and then we have Vagrant pulling down specific Vagrant boxes. So these are like virtual boxes or VMware boxes, and then on each of those, they're getting different suites installed on them. So we have a default suite, Kitchen Developer Suite, a Postgres suite. The thing we're going to focus on is what this Postgres suite does and how our tests work in that suite. And then, as I mentioned before, you can grab these boxes from Puppet Labs, actually provides them on the Vagrant Cloud, which is now called Atlas. It's just a central repository of where you can grab virtual boxes, VMware boxes to get started, and you don't have to worry about provisioning, creating those boxes from scratch. It makes it easy to get started. And then, as I said before, we're just going to run a Puppet Apply, so it doesn't require Puppet Master or anything. This Puppet test adds more output, so you can see if things do go wrong with your Puppet module. If you're building something from scratch and you add in your own suite, your Kitchen suite into the bottom, and you try to test that box and for some reason it doesn't work, you can actually see exactly how that failed. So this is awesome for everyone that's just starting with Puppet here. Consider looking at how Kitchen CI or Puppet Labs Beaker project has you go through like this development test iteration cycle, because it's a lot of it's a sweet learning cycle that you can get into. So we're going to talk about what the Postgres module does and what sort of tests we have in there. So part of the test is just looking for the right packages. Now, as I said before, there can be package flip-flops, or maybe you have a package that conflicts with something else. So just even running this may seem like a trivial test, has caught some problems internally for Waitatech. That was the first part of the code. This is the second part, which is we loop through all those packages we had in that array, and then we just make sure that those packages are installed. So all those tests that you saw, the Postgres tests, we only have about 5 of our probably 80 modules under this test cycle, but for anyone who has worked on any of our modules, they would prefer to kind of have this way of spin up a virtual machine, apply that Puppet module, and then have the system test itself instead of having to investigate, suss out what the module was supposed to do, make sure it was correct. So when you push it, you have a very high confidence that your changes aren't going to make me mad or aren't going to make one of my coworkers mad. So the best response that I got for this work is from one of my coworkers who had the response of like when someone asks for Puppet help, like I just run away. That was one of his responses. And the funny thing is that Postgres test was contributed by him, and he is like fanatically behind this idea. So you can change someone from not wanting to help and running away to being like a staunch supporter of improving and contributing to your Puppet infrastructure. So that should help you get rid of a strain group if you have more people contributing with the ability to contribute high value and high quality code. So automating authority is something to keep in your back pocket as a trick, so that you don't spend all sorts of time installing a service and testing things in an emergency setting or a normal fashion. So remember, I said before, if those emergency and normal priority situations are different, that's a leading indicator that you are causing yourself a lot of pain in the future, because your process should be the same in an emergency situation as a normal priority situation. If you're not there yet, that's totally fine. In some cases, we do things that are not kosher process-wise, but you should aim for that. Same process for emergency and normal priority. So the last item that I want to discuss, and then I'm going to leave some time for some questions. We can all ask or drill into more details if you want to ask questions, or we can get ready for the next presenter. But the last aspect, which is my favorite, is this idea of rebuilding ruthlessly. So this should help you improve the ability to build a new box for any engineer. So we started off this presentation explaining how our sysadmin really wanted to make his life easier, creating boxes for new engineers, creating boxes anywhere, even in the data center, a much less hassle task. And this also should reduce the strain on your group. So we'll have less people, hopefully, walking across the park in the human sidewalk. And then we'll end up with less processes and teams being subverted. So we want to pick the best process for everybody and have that process determined by everybody. That may seem like the wrong way to run a regime to some, but we've seen that work wonders for us. So here's what we came up with. We have build slaves for Jenkins that haven't been rebuilt in about 3 years until just recently. And so they became special snowflakes, as I'm sure a lot of you know about your own machines. So installing a service on every one of our boxes, the easiest way to do that was to SSH into them and install a package, at least 2 or 3 years ago, for engineers who just wanted to get their software to build, wanted to fix their build that they had broken for some reason, just wanted things to work, right? They didn't want to go through the process. So we had machines that we have no idea what kind of quirky things were installed on them. So we had a house of cards situation. We had builds that were tied to specific nodes. We had no idea why they would only work on that machine versus the other 7. So there's this great quote from Futurama from these two characters, because they all know Futurama. I don't actually like Futurama, but this quote is amazing. So Kif says, "Captain, may I have a word with you?" Zap Brannigan says, "No." This should sound similar. I mean, this sounds similar to me in the sysadmin world. And Kip says, "It's an emergency, sir." Zap says, No, tell me when it's a catastrophe and then get back to me. And then there's a loud rumbling noise. And then Zap Brannigan decides, okay, well now it's actually worth my time because something is going wrong. But there was no action until he was made aware of like, oh, this isn't, I'm probably gonna die if I don't address this situation. So what we want to do is destroy all of our build machines. This was my idea. Destroy all of our build machines on a certain schedule so that we have, if people want to install packages on them and their build works for that day, that's totally fine, but it's going to break tomorrow when we rebuild that box. So we want to rebuild our build machines from scratch. And you could apply this concept to anything in your infrastructure. Maybe you have an area that makes more sense to start with. For us, that was the build infrastructure. But we want to do everything from scratch and have really a test coverage and prove out our whole Puppet provisioning process from beginning to end on a continual basis. So we have our Puppet master that has, I think we have about 14 build slaves, and we want to destroy 2 of those every night is the process that we have right now. And this is our beloved build farm. Rows and rows of old developer workstations. And we're actually going to rebuild this one and this one with just a push of a button. So how did we do that? We had Jenkins using Ansible to coordinate with Foreman and also Jenkins and re-provision. Both the bulk of the work actually happens with Foreman and Puppet. So exactly how we do that is the Puppet master knows which slaves are alive. We want to use Ansible to tell the Jenkins master to say, hey, take this slave offline. Then we want to have Ansible tell Foreman, we're going to destroy this box. So Ansible uses a REST call to Foreman and says, when you see this box restart or boot up from scratch and go through the pixie boot process, then deliver an image to provision based off of. Now, at that point, after we get past the Debian installer portion of this rebuild process, we're going to have Puppet apply a whole ton of packages. So since these are build machines, these are like Java libraries, native libraries, Ruby libraries, Python libraries, like a ton of packages. It takes us about 45 minutes with Puppet to install all of our packages on each of these machines. So this is a nightly thing. We don't run this during the day, even though we could. Remember, we're building these from scratch. We're not leaving anything on them, and we're encountering every single piece of our Puppet, Foreman, Jenkins, all sorts of infrastructure aspects. So if anything could go wrong, this is catching like it every night. So in Ansible, this is just an overview of, we do some things on localhost to download the Jenkins CLI jar, so we can tell Ansible, hey, take this slave offline, make sure there aren't any jobs running on it at the time, and we're only going to do 2 at a time. And then we're going to apply this Jenkins slave role. Since this is an Ansible meetup, and I think the Ansible, whole Ansible playbook would be like off the screen, I'm just going to outline the tasks that we run and kind of give you an idea. If you want to see the actual code, ping me and I will be happy to send you over a version of it. So we want to take the slave offline. Then we want to wait for the Jenkins slave to become idle. Then initiate the Foreman build. This will deliver that Debian installer image when the machine boots up. And then restart the server, verify the server is dead. And then we're going to wait for approximately an hour, hour and a half for the system to come back alive after the Debian installer process finishes and runs a Puppet run as a part of that Debian install process. So it's like a pre-seed file. And then we're going to launch that Jenkins slave and then put it back online and hopefully have jobs succeed or find jobs that were installing weird packages that we didn't know about. So since my videos aren't working, all this is just showing that this thing works and I'm not making it up. And I can prove that it's not made up because I just ran both of these yesterday and we encountered some problems and those problems got fixed. I'll discuss those in a bit because those are really exciting. But here you can see when this process is going. We have the pre-seed file. This is actually running Puppet as a part of the Debian installer process. And then this is Puppet output. Pre-seed stuff, Puppet output. And then we have one of the boxes actually is alive and ready to be added back into the Jenkins cluster. This one's a little bit slower, a little bit misused and abused, maybe a little bit slower than the rest. And then we have those boxes come up, and we provide a dashboard for all of our team members sitting in the same area. So every morning we see the status of that process on this red and green board. There's check marks behind things too. It's an information radio that we have found super useful in determining like what our priorities will be for that day. Like if these three things are broken, you're gonna have a bad day. But if this is broken, you might be scared to even try to log on to your machine. So this idea of rebuilding ruthlessly reduces the strain on a group and hopefully reduces the amount of people subverting your practice that you want to make, the best practice, the way to absolute success in your company, and the way to the most amount of speed for development. And so what we've uncovered with this rebuilding ruthlessly process is we've found problems with our pre-seed file, like not answering all the questions correctly. We've found our app proxy has problems all the time if multiple people are hitting it at the same time. We've had initial Puppet run problems with our Puppet modules that were only found on pre-seed kind of runs in that special environment. And so after sussing all that stuff out, I was like, man, we got all this stuff figured out. We fixed these 20 bugs. But a few weeks ago, we had a developer say, today, by myself, I rebuilt my machine, my whole development environment without any problems. No request was filed for any help. He just did it, followed the tutorial, a couple line readme, and did it all himself. He was super excited about it, and I was like, I wish I could claim that was all my doing, but it's really a lot of people doing the right thing, having the right focus, the right goal to build something, build an ecosystem around Puppet, all these awesome tools that we knew could do the job and actually have success in those areas. So just yesterday, the slave rebuild process failed because Puppet couldn't find our Jenkins user, couldn't do anything related to the Jenkins user. So I submitted a ticket to one of our sysadmins. He looked at it, he's like, that's the weirdest problem I've ever seen in my life. Like, it works for me. Then he realized, and had a small heart attack, that our whole LDAP infrastructure in the office was down. And so the only reason that people were logging into boxes were because SSSD was caching credentials on everyone's boxes. So if there would have been any sort of problem, like no one would have been able to log in and get anything done. So this is totally related to Deepak's talk about we want to reward people based on the things that don't happen instead of the things that do happen and are just exciting because we got to fight a fire and got to be heroic and solve a problem. But this is awesome because we didn't have any problems. Obviously not having LDAP come down would have been the best situation, but having boxes that are rebuilt and don't have any cache of LDAP and finding out about that before it became a huge issue for the whole productivity of engineering was by far a better step too. So he even said, you may have saved a huge headache from happening tomorrow things. He brought me in muffins from My Favorite Muffin this morning, and he just can't stop talking about how this is the best thing ever. So this is why you should do it in your company. So if you rebuild ruthlessly, you'll end up transforming a regular Puppet regime, just a basic usage of Puppet. That might impose some hardships because it's new to you, it's new to everybody. People don't know exactly what Puppet's doing on their system. And you're going to have low involvement, a strained group, and subverted processes and people that are scared to look at Puppet. And then all of a sudden you have implemented these 3 tips, tricks, tools, whatever you want to call them, and you've created this benevolent Puppet regime, which improves the operations of people and computers. And you're creating, instead of a loop that is a positive feedback loop of like negativity and oh, my life sucks, I don't even want to be here right now, there's all these support requests all the time, you're creating a culture and a community of high involvement, a performant team. They're excited to work on things. Like I said, my coworker is an advocate for all this testing processes that he didn't know were even possible with Puppet. And then you have a rewarding process. You have people in the process that are wanting to change things. And so that would be me. I didn't start out being a fan of Puppet, but now I'm here giving a Puppet presentation, and I couldn't have enough of these awesome tools. And Puppet is a huge part of our infrastructure being as seamless as it is today. So that makes me feel like this. So with these 3 tools, you can commit to collaboration, basic step. If you automate your authority, you change that traffic cop to a stoplight, and then you start rebuilding ruthlessly like we did with adult slaves, you'll have smooth sailing on this road to production for all your engineers. So that's the end of my talk, and feel free to email me if you have any questions, or hit me up for questions now. I think I'm out of time. Ran up right against the wire. So feel free to email me, or I'm going to the happy hour too, so just find me there.